Our next speaker is Daniela Bonscher. Daniela is a recent graduate from Rice University with a Bachelor's of Arts in History and Latin American and Latinx Studies with a minor in Museums and Cultural Heritage. A published author, her studies range from social histories of the Texas borderlands to Latin representation in film. She is also proud to be from El Paso, Texas, which inspires her to explore her Mexican-American identity through music and poetry. An aspiring professor, writer, and museum curator, Daniela ultimately plans to pursue a PhD in order to study public history and culture in the future. Her presentation is titled Runaways, Rivers, and Narrative Reconstruction, Enslaved People and the Utilization of Texas Geography in the Escape to Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Daniela to the stage.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Daniela Bonscher. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'd like to thank the Texas General Land Office for having me here today. I'd also like to pay homage to my family for supporting me, and also to everybody at Rice who supported my studies as well. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. A fun fact is that the last time I was in this museum was almost 10 years ago for a National History Day competition when I was in middle school. It was here I decided that I wanted to study history, so this is a special full circle moment. Thank you. A little bit more about my research. I wrote a history honors thesis titled In Mexico You Could Be Free, a narrative approach to Texas slavery and the southbound Underground Railroad. I plan to continue researching Texas public memory and the preservation of 19th century U.S.-Mexico borderlands history, from which this work you will see today stems. Now, the Underground Railroad had several borders that denoted a line between slavery and freedom. Perhaps most famous is the Mason-Dixon line that separated northern free states and southern slave states in the US. However, for enslaved people living in Texas, the US-Mexico border represented an opportunity for emancipation that was much closer, as you can see here. For context, the historiography of the Underground Railroad largely focuses on the famous northern routes, whose importance also cannot be understated. Focusing our attention southward adds a variety of perspectives for those who escaped to Mexico. The relationship between slavery and the changing US-Mexico border during the 19th century is a relatively new topic in Texas historiography as well. For reference, one of the defining works I used in this project, titled South to Freedom, Runaway Slaves to Mexico and the Road to the Civil War by Alice Baumgartner, was only published in 2020, so this is a growing area of research. Where my work departs from Baumgartner's, however, is not only looking at the larger events, but also examining the individual narratives of enslaved people of African descent who are living through them. I've focused particularly on runaways, whose presence is often erased from the historical record. In fact, reading about them in advertisements runs the risk of treating them as statistics rather than individuals, given the limited information presented. However, using advertisement analysis techniques proposed in Fugitive Slaves and Spaces of Freedom in North America, I emphasize that this is far from the whole picture. Thus, by reading runaway advertisements, we can reconstruct narratives of enslaved people who utilize the Texas geography to aid their escape during the mid-19th century, particularly the period between the 1830s and 1860s. Using a variety of sources ranging from literature to archives here at UT's Briscoe Center for American History, my project aims to provide insight into the lives of three freedom seekers, namely Henry, Miranda, and Anthony. Emerging from the advertisements posted for their capture are actually details about their journeys, support networks, and even personalities. In order to understand their plight, we must first understand the legal and social context of the institution of slavery in the borderlands. Such escapes were taking place in a moment when Mexico had begun the process of abolishing slavery in 1829 and would fully outlaw the institution by 1837. Additionally, cotton production was on the rise in Texas, Anglo-Texans were rebelling against Mexican abolition laws, and Texas slave laws were constantly shifting. Following the Texas Revolution, slavery was upheld in the region by the 1836 Constitution of the Republic of Texas, as demonstrated in this excerpt from Section 9 of the portion titled General Provisions. Texas would then be subsequently annexed as a slave state following the Mexican-American War in 1845. Tensions grew after the passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, which required runaways to be returned to their enslavers even if they had reached free states, and made legal opportunities for emancipation more difficult. Additionally, the U.S. Civil War began in 1861. This meant that enslaved people had to navigate all of these rapid changes taking place just within a few decades. Thus emerged the southbound Underground Railroad routes along which they escaped to Mexico, as you can see on this map of 1830s Texas. They passed through big cities, including Austin, Houston, and San Antonio, as well as several border cities such as Eagle Pass and Brownsville. The latter two cities are next to Piedras Negras and Matamoros, respectively, on the Mexican side of the border. Similar to the sanctuary cities of the north, locations in Texas, including the aforementioned sites, were points of guidance in the longer escape to emancipation. This was particularly helpful as navigating the Texas environments was no easy task. Runaways had to traverse a variety of landscapes such as marshes, forests, and deserts. After overcoming Texas's multiple biomes, people still had to avoid drowning while crossing the Rio Grande. This was on top of the risk of punishment if they were caught. Some scholars, such as Eric Walter, state that Texan enslavers resorted to harsher punishments to deter people from escaping to the proximity of Mexican free soil. One such form of torture included being branded on the face with an R for runaway. Simultaneously, the vastness of the land granted enslaved people the opportunity for fluid movement, solidifying the borderlands as a liminal space between slavery and freedom. This fluidity was an important factor for those whose labor relied on moving from town to town. As they worked in different places, they became familiar with both the physical landmarks on the way to plantations or ranches, and potentially other enslaved people who could help them escape. Thus, this would aid in the navigation of the geography headed towards Mexico. So how exactly do we deduce this information when the portraits of individuals provided in advertisements are so limited? My method of analysis comes from a chapter in Fugitive Slaves and Spaces of Freedom in North America titled Advertising Miranda, Runaway Slaves in Texas, 1835 to 1865 by Kyle Ainsworth. Ainsworth argues that the richness of an individual's story must be searched for beyond the text in what he refers to as the metadata. This includes where the newspaper was posted and how many days after the person's escape it was published. The most common information provided in postings include a physical description of the person with occasional reference to their background, labor specialization, and other traits for identification. When coupling these details with the metadata, two narrative aspects emerge: direction assumptions and personal knowledge. Direction assumptions are revealed through postings' frequency and location, with enslavers giving reference points as to where they believe the person was headed. Two common points of reference in such a journey were the city of San Antonio and various rivers, including the namesake San Antonio River. In 1844, Texas law offered a $50 reward to anyone who's successful in capturing a runaway in the territory between the San Antonio River and the Rio Grande. This suggests enslaved people would be more difficult to track once they pass this point, identifying the stretch of land as a key liminal space. Because enslaved people's voices are unfortunately not present in this type of document, the subsequent deductions about their familiarity with environments, towns, and communities are a powerful window into their personal knowledge. By extension, we are provided insight into this individual's personality, fleshing out the richness of their story as much as possible. Moving into the first of our individual stories today, I wanted to start out with a man named Henry. As you can see, he was a highly intelligent blacksmith in his 30s who had a knack for storytelling. This advertisement, which I accessed from the Texas Slave Laws collection at the Briscoe Center here in Austin, was posted in Lavaca County in 1853. The runaway search was prompted by David Irwin and put out in the newspaper by John Irwin. This posting, based on their shared names, suggests that the two are related. Then, if we dig a little bit deeper, we can look into what this meant for Henry. The labor conducted by African-American blacksmiths often required travel as they made tools and other forms of ironwork for local plantations, according to the National Museum of African-American History and Culture. Therefore, Henry would have already moved around various places surrounding Lavaca County. Because the advertisement was posted by somebody who was not his enslaver, there's also the possibility that Henry would travel between these two relatives' homes for labor, further acquainting him with the landscape and networks of other enslaved people at different locations. This is directly observable in the assertion made by Irwin here. He's acquainted along the road from this place to Lockhart, and he may attempt to go up that way, and then by the way of San Antonio to Mexico. Not only does this emphasize the importance of San Antonio as a reference point, but it also confirms Henry's knowledge about the area. We can additionally deduce using the metadata he made it pretty far. If you look at the dates here, Henry absconded on November 12, 1853. However, this advertisement wasn't posted until November 28th, giving him a head start of almost over 2 weeks. Under the assumption that he did pass San Antonio, he made it into the liminal space in between the two rivers. This was due to his extensive skills as a blacksmith and a storyteller, letting us know that he was a quick thinker and likely had prepared such stories while he planned his escape to Mexico. Next is the narrative of Miranda, a 19-year-old young woman whose story I was first introduced to through her namesake book chapter. I then found the original 1840 advertisement from the Texas Runaway Slave Project, accessible through the East Texas Digital Archives at Stephen F. Austin State University. The advertisement structure begins with the standard identification information: Miranda's skin color, height, body type, and age. She was also previously enslaved by a Lewis Knight of Nacogdoches County. It is important to note that unlike the advertisement for Henry, posted by a relative of the enslaver, this notice was posted by her current enslaver, or the subscriber, Robert F. Millard. The inclusion of Knight's name in this paper thus suggests that Millard believed there was a chance that others would recognize Miranda from her previous location. While we do not know what kind of work Miranda carried out, her implied familiarity with the community also meant that she knew individuals potentially enslaved by Knight, or perhaps others throughout the county who could provide a support system in her escape. Additionally, the inclusion of the county itself is intriguing. The aforementioned origin of the advertisement is Nacogdoches. However, the newspapers where this was posted, namely Morning Star and Texas Telegraph and Texas Register, were not in the same county. In fact, these two newspapers were based in Houston. Posting a public notice was often an enslaver's last resort in pursuit of a freedom seeker. First, they would hire slave catchers or look themselves, or hope that the individual would simply return on their own. The metadata showing how Millard posted this twice in a different city reflects not only his personal desperation, but the fact that he thought Miranda was headed southwards. Based on her implied knowledge of the community, this is highly probable, which reveals as much about Miranda's potential community networks as it does aspects of her personality. Miranda carried off 4 dresses, 2 for domestic settings, 1 in plaid blue and the other in red. She also brought 1 black silk and 1 black muslin. Living under an institution that sought to deprive the enslaved of their personhood, it is no wonder that Miranda would bring along what were more than likely her personal belongings. Packing 4 dresses was not an easy task either, meaning that she was resourceful and had planned this escape out for a while. Lastly, the fact that she brought dresses for multiple occasions, ranging from domestic to formal, shows a sense of preparation and pride. In a context where enslaved women frequently suffered attempts at dehumanization, this is a powerful testament to Miranda's resilience. The last story I wanted to share with you all today is that of Anthony, a blacksmith and gunsmith in his late 20s. This advertisement, which I also accessed through the East Texas Digital Archives, was posted in 1861, the same year as the beginning of the Civil War. After describing Anthony's height and weight, it goes into extensive detail about his skills and personality. He's described as quick-spoken, intelligent, and altogether a very likely boy. The extent of this description is a bit unusual, considering how it is perhaps more granular in comparison to the other notices we've seen today. It is extremely powerful in giving us exact details of Anthony's friendly and smart personality. Now for the metadata. He escaped from Chapel Hill, which is about halfway between Austin and Houston. However, similar to Miranda's advertisement, this article was published somewhere other than his county of origin, namely the San Antonio Herald. This only further emphasizes the importance of San Antonio within Texas geography for the enslaved. Because he was a blacksmith like Henry, Anthony likely experienced similar opportunities for movement and acquaintance with the landscape. It's intriguing that he preferred to pass himself off as a gunsmith instead, perhaps to hide how familiar he was with travel to keep the journey clandestine. This is especially if he were trying to keep fellow enslaved people who helped him safe. As you can see here, his enslaver is not W.A. Dorset, who posted this notice. Rather, it is Dr. R.F. Llewellyn, from whom Dorset hired Anthony. As a result, Anthony could use the situation to his advantage and make connections with more enslaved communities. Additionally, in an explicit reveal, there is no doubt that Anthony's trajectory was headed towards Mexico, as he was constantly making threats about it. While this in fact confirms his trajectory, it adds yet another dimension to his personality. This fleshes out his boldness and determination, stating that he would run away full well knowing the consequences of doing so. To conclude, I wanted to revisit the map from earlier to provide a visual of the 3 freedom seekers' southward trajectories. The fact that each individual escaped in a different decade shows the longevity of using these Texas routes. Furthermore, the Underground Railroad to Mexico was not simply an overarching concept, but rather a method of travel and connection that enslaved people of African descent utilized as they could. While the Texas geography and environment could be dangerous, it was also a key liminal space where individuals could escape to freedom. This was crucial for Runaways in particular, as shown in their advertisements, which were not simply statistics. They are stories of real human beings escaping to freedom. While we cannot fill in all the gaps, the first step is to acknowledge and elevate the diversity of these marginalized experiences, especially those of enslaved people of African descent. For it is not a matter of being their voice, but rather listening to them. Thank you.